You're exhausted, not physically, mentally, because somewhere between yesterday and right now, you spent a massive chunk of your energy doing something that got you absolutely nothing in return. You explained yourself. You justified your choices. You worked twice as hard just so someone would finally notice. And the worst part? They still didn't get it. They still didn't respect it. So you tried harder. And that's exactly where they want you. Here's the thing nobody tells you about the need to prove yourself. It's not a sign of ambition. It's a leash. And the moment you start pulling on it, whoever's holding the other end gets stronger. Machiavelli watched this for decades. He studied power, not as a concept, not as a philosophy lecture, but as a living, breathing system that operates every single day in offices, in relationships, in every room where people are quietly competing for control. And what he found was this: the people who felt the constant need to justify themselves, to demonstrate their worth, to make sure everyone understood their value, those people almost never held real power. They were always chasing approval, and approval is the opposite of power. Today we're going to break down exactly why proving yourself is costing you, and what Machiavelli's method actually looks like in practice. Let's start with the mechanism. Why do you feel the need to prove yourself in the first place? Because at some point someone made you feel like your value was conditional. Conditional on your performance, conditional on their judgment, conditional on whether you could demonstrate convincingly enough that you deserved to be in the room. And so, you learn to perform. You learn to over-explain. You learn to work a little harder than necessary, not because the work required it, but because you needed the validation that came after. Machiavelli called this one of the most dangerous traps a person can fall into, because the moment your sense of worth becomes dependent on other people's recognition, those people own you, not aggressively, not obviously, just quietly. You start making decisions based on what will be visible, what will be noticed, what will get acknowledged, and in doing that, you stop making decisions based on what actually matters. The practical shift here is simple, but uncomfortable. Start doing things that no one will ever see, not because you're hiding, but because you need to prove to yourself that you can act without an audience, that your effort doesn't require a witness to be real. That is where self-respect actually begins. Most people believe that the way to command respect is to articulate their value, or to speak up, make their case, to ensure that people understand exactly who they are and what they bring. Machiavelli understood something completely different. He observed that the leaders who survived the longest, the ones who maintained real influence across years and decades, were rarely the loudest ones in the room. They were the ones who understood when to say nothing. Here's the psychology behind it. Every time you explain yourself, you hand people a map of what you care about. Every time you defend yourself, you reveal where you feel vulnerable, and anyone paying attention will file that information away and use it the next chance they get. But when you stay quiet, when someone challenges you and you don't flinch, don't scramble, don't rush to justify something shifts, people don't know what to do with it. They expected resistance. They expected you to perform, and instead they got stillness. That stillness is unreadable, and unreadable people are impossible to control. This doesn't mean you never speak. It means that when you do speak, it carries weight precisely because you don't speak carelessly. Choose your silence. Choose your words, because in most situations, the most powerful thing you'll ever say is nothing at all. There's a version of proving yourself that's actually productive. It's called building something, and it looks nothing like explaining yourself to people who are never going to understand anyway. Think about the dynamic Machiavelli described repeatedly. The man who constantly justifies his decisions signals that he doubts them. The man who simply executes and lets outcomes speak, he signals certainty. And certainty, even when it's uncomfortable, commands a kind of involuntary respect. Your success is a far more devastating response than anything you could say directly. The coworker who undermines you behind your back? Keep building. The person who questioned your direction? Keep building. The room that didn't take you seriously? Build something they can't ignore. This is not passive. This is the most aggressive thing you can do because it removes other people from the equation entirely. You stop playing defense. You stop reacting to their narrative. You start creating one that's impossible to argue with. Results are not arrogant. Results are simply honest. And in a world full of noise, quiet consistency is the loudest thing in the room. Here's something that rarely gets named directly. Every time you over-explain, you're not just wasting time. You're training the people around you to expect it. You're teaching them that your boundaries are negotiable, that your decisions are up for debate, that with enough pushback, you'll justify yourself again. And people, even good people, will use that pattern without realizing it, not maliciously, just because you've established that access is available, that your energy, your reasoning, your internal world, all of it can be requested on demand. Machiavelli's method was different. He understood that a certain degree of strategic opacity, of not giving everything away, maintained the upper hand in almost every interaction. Not mystery for the sake of manipulation, just the natural result of a person who is comfortable enough with their own decisions that they don't require others to validate them. Stop explaining things you've already thought through. You don't owe anyone a breakdown of your reasoning unless they're directly involved in the outcome. Your choices are yours. Protect them like they are. The final piece of this is the most subtle, and in some ways the hardest to build. Real authority doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. You've been in a room with someone like this, someone whose presence you felt before they even said anything, not because they were loud, not because they were performing, just because something about the way they carried themselves signaled that they had nothing to prove. That's not luck. That's not personality. That is the accumulated result of someone who stopped leaking energy in all the wrong directions, someone who stopped chasing approval long enough to actually build something worth having, someone who learned slowly, deliberately, that their attention is the most valuable thing they own and that not everyone deserves it. Machiavelli's method isn't about being cold. It isn't about being difficult. It's about being genuinely secure. Secure enough that other people's opinions, while noted, don't run your internal world. Secure enough to sit in silence when silence is the right move. Secure enough to walk out of rooms that demand you shrink. That version of you exists. It's not distant. It's being built right now in every choice you make about where your energy goes. Stop proving yourself to people who are not qualified to judge you. Stop explaining decisions you've already made with confidence. Stop performing effort for an audience that wasn't paying attention anyway. The most powerful thing you can do starting today is become so focused on what you're building that the need for external validation simply stops making sense. Not because you've given up, because you've finally understood something that most people spend their whole lives missing. Your presence is not for everyone. Your energy is not unlimited. And the version of you that moves through the world without constantly justifying its right to be there, that version is not soft. That version is untouchable. The old need to prove yourself was never really about strength. It was about fear. And fear is not a foundation you want to keep building on. Build something real instead. And let that be the only argument you need.